Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name's Crystal and I've been wanting to start a YouTube for a really long time, since I was a little kid, and I love reading and I love watching booktube, and I thought what better way to start than with a monthly wrap-up, except it's both January and February. So yeah, let's get into it. So I started off January fairly strong. I actually had a pretty good reading month in December, but for some reason I've been in this like really weird slump the past probably 2 years where like it's been very like I've read good books but I haven't become obsessed with them. They haven't become like favorites. But I did start off the year pretty good with Tithe by Holly Black. If you didn't know, the Cruel Prince series isn't actually the only series in the Folk of the Air. There's actually Tithe, which is part of another trilogy, and then there's also The Darkest Part of the Forest, which is a standalone. But all those books follow characters that show up briefly in the Cruel Prince trilogy, and I've been wanting to read them for a while because I love the Cruel Prince. So I read The Darkest Part of the Forest back in December and I really enjoyed that, and I thought, why not start off the year with Tithe? Okay, so we follow our main character Kay. She's 16 and her mum is part of a rock band. So she follows her mum around like city to city with her rock band. But one night her mum is attacked by someone and it's sort of under suspicious circumstances. So they end up having to move back home with Kay's grandmother. Kay, as a little girl, used to have a lot of experiences with fairies. She used to have like 3 fairy friends that she would always talk about, and people would just, say, oh, like Kay's crazy or whatever. But coming back, she loves her hometown because she loves fairies, she loves everything about them. So she's really happy to be home, but her mum wants to join another band and like move to a different city again. While they are home, Kay ends up getting stuck in the middle of some fairy drama between 2 different kingdoms, Seelie and Unseelie Court. If I'm remembering correctly, it's the Seelie and Unseelie Court. They're having a battle over land or something. I don't know. There's an argument. There's tensions between the 2 courts. She ends up getting caught in the middle of it and potentially becoming a piece in the game, we'll say. So I gave this 4 stars. I really did enjoy it. The imagery in this book is so like vivid. It's very like grunge, sort of dingy atmosphere, and like that really comes off like from the get-go. I just could picture like the aesthetic of the surroundings and everything so clearly. And Holly is really good at like incorporating little quirks and personality traits into characters to make them seem real. Ever since like rereading The Cruel Prince for like, I think it was my 3rd time rereading it, I really picked up on a lot of like foreshadowing sort of that she put in, like just the first chapter alone, like the prologue, where we're introduced to Jude and her sisters and Maddox. All of their first scenes and their first lines perfectly represent their characters. So of course she also has that in Tithe. But for me personally, one thing that I really loved about this book was the atmosphere. Like it was so clear to me. She did a really good job at painting a picture for this book. Also, if I'm looking down here, it's because I've got my laptop up with my Goodreads review. One thing I love about Holly is that she will absolutely, without a doubt, every single time make her fairy kings just ridiculously obsessed with their girls. Like Carden and Jude on another level, like nothing could beat that. But this book as well, like the last line, I'm seeing a pattern, okay, and I'm so here for it. I love this for Holly. The same with Darkest Part of the Forest. I think for me, I wasn't as hooked on this book because I didn't love as many of the characters. Like I love 2 of the main characters. The 3rd one's a little bit iffy. But otherwise, like, we don't have a super big ensemble of characters that are like, we don't really get to know them, and a lot of them aren't exactly presented as characters that like you should fall in love with, I guess. A lot of them I think are supposed to be unlikable, which sometimes is great. Like, I mean, is Jude... No, she's meant to be likable, I think. But for this one, I think there's a lot of questionable characters, so I didn't really... Like, Kay and Royben were really my hooks into the story, I guess. Like, they're who I was reading it for. So I haven't continued the series yet, but I do plan on doing so. at some point in the future. So that's Tyke by Holly Black. I gave it 4 stars. I did really enjoy it, and I think like anyone who enjoys Quill Prince or Holly Black's writing, then you're absolutely gonna love this book as well. Okay, the next book I read in January was The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. If you've seen Dance of Thieves around, I feel like a lot of people know this by now, but if you've seen Dance of Thieves on like booktop, on booktok, or booktube or bookstagram, any of that, then you may know that it's actually a spin-off series, I think, or like a continuation of The Kiss of Deception, which is the first series in the universe that Dance of Thieves takes place in. The series is called The Remnant Chronicles, and it's a trilogy. Kiss of Deception is the first book in it, and I actually listened to the audiobook because I couldn't find it anywhere on like either in bookstores or on my e-library. I eventually looked it up on Spotify and realized that they have it on there included in premium, so I was able to listen to the audiobook. So in The Kiss of Deception, we follow our main character, Leah. She's a princess. In this world, there's a lot of backstory with the gods and like sort of like, I guess, mythological stories or history sort of because of past events and sort of how their country came to be. I can't remember if it's every first daughter or like just royal first daughters. A little bit fuzzy on that, but anyway. In this world, first daughters are born with the gift of sight, so they can sort of have little glimpses of the future. And of course, she's a princess, so it's highly expected of her in particular to have the gift of sight. However, she does not. But all these years, her parents have been keeping up the sham that like she does have the gift of sight. And in order to secure an alliance with a neighboring country that they've sort of been at war with, or like, you know, there's animosity between them. So they want to secure an alliance because there's a third country that's sort of building up and trying to take over both of them. So they're like, okay, we need to form an alliance so that we can both take out our common enemy. So they arrange marriage with Leah and the son of the other country. And in order to secure that like marriage and alliance, part of it was that she had the gift of sight, which of course she doesn't. So there's problems. Now, Leah being Leah, she absolutely does not want this marriage at all without having met this guy, not even once. One feels like she could sort of do more than just be like a prop in a marriage, but she's sort of like always shut down. I think she was very kept behind closed doors, especially like the later years of her life. She was very isolated, I guess. Like they really kept her safe, and she doesn't want that, and she doesn't want to marry this person that she's never met because she's expecting him to be like some old guy and, you know, live a loveless, unhappy life. So the morning of her wedding, she decides to run away. Fair enough. So she ends up running away with her maid, and they travel across many, I don't know, lands to this village that I'm pretty sure the maid grew up in or lived in for a portion of her life or something. They arrive at this village, they become little barmaids. Leah assumes this new life of just, you know, being a barmaid and like hanging out in this very quiet, like happy, relaxed town and not having any expectations of her for the first time in her life. And then 2 mysterious guys show up, one of which is a prince, one of which is an assassin, and things unfold. So I was really into it in the first 2/3, I guess, of this book. Like when she was at the town, not a lot happened, I'll definitely say that, but it was sort of just giving like cute small town romance vibes, but in a fantasy world, because there really wasn't a lot going on in terms of like the fantasy background. Like we were literally just in a town and like there'd be mentions of like the old gods or something and Leah's gift, but of course she doesn't have it, so like, and there's like a little bit of a love triangle, and I was fine with it because we were so clearly leaning towards one of them, and I was like, okay, cool, like we can just brush the other one off, like nothing's gonna happen. It was like so obvious in the town. Like I was enjoying it. Like it was a little bit cliche, but it was still like fun. It was just like, again, like it was just giving like small town romance but fantasy. So I enjoyed the part where they're in the town, but then something happens and Leah decides that she has to leave. This is heading into spoilery territory. Okay, let's go back without spoilers. Something happens and then another thing happens, and then we end up spending a lot more time with the other person in the love triangle. This was so frustrating to read. They have so many, like, we spend such a long time with this other like it's at least a third of the book where it's pretty much just Leah and this other guy. Like we don't have our other like sort of main characters with us. And I was fine with him at the beginning, but now it was like there were so many forced, like, okay, in any other book they would have been romantic scenes, except it felt so forced because Leah clearly had no interest in this guy. Oh, it was so uncomfortable to read. It was annoying to read because like he kept expecting her to like have feelings back for him, except she had already said and clearly exhibited that like she didn't return those feelings, and yet we kept having more and more romantic scenes. And like his attitude, he kept saying like, oh, I care for you, like whatever, I'm doing this because I care for you. I think not. Anyway, I would have much preferred if there had been no love triangle. Love triangles can work, okay? They can be interesting. They can, like, I don't love them, but they can work. But this, I would have much preferred if there was only romantic tension between her and the other guy, and like this guy and her had just been good friends, because it felt so forced. And like, especially when she had clearly said, no, I don't share those feelings for you. But yeah, it was just a lot of that over and over again for the last like half to a third of the book, and I couldn't deal with it. It was so annoying. But I pushed through because I did enjoy the first part, and I was like, okay, well, once we get past this bit, we'll get to the actual meat of the story in the second book, and like this won't be as big of a thing. The next book is Heart of Betrayal, and we're in a new setting now. Things have happened. Without spoiling, how do I say this? I can't really explain the plot of this book without spoiling the end of the first book. So we're in a new setting, right? New things are happening. We've got a few new characters. I was expecting to sort of get into more of the plot. And the first book was very vague about what was going on in terms of like the plot. Can you tell this book frustrates me? I got like a good way through. I want to say I was like a third of the way. Actually, I can check. Oh my god. I was almost, I was halfway. I was 46% into this book. 2 days had passed in book time. So when she gets to this new place at like the end of the first book and beginning of the second book, from there to 50% of the way through the book, 2 days have passed. And nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. It was just the same as the end of the last book, where like it was like multiple romantic scenes, except they weren't romantic because Leah didn't like him that way, and he was sort of forcing his feelings onto her and putting this like guilt on her, and like reacting badly when he knew that she didn't have feelings for him, but he so it was just, it felt very repetitive, and I just didn't like, it was just frustrating me. It wasn't like, oh, will they, won't they, who's she gonna get with? And then they also added in, they started having issues between her and the other guy because they worked out this sort of secret plan, and then because of that they started getting like jealous, and I'm like, what are you doing? You knew this is what you had to do, so like why are you getting jealous? And the plot remained like unknown. Like there's still some like the fantasy part of it and like the magical element and mythological stories and that sort of thing, it still remained very vague. Like we didn't know where the plot was going really still. I got too frustrated. I couldn't do it. So yeah, I DNF'd that book. I think I forgot to say what I rated Kiss of Deception. So I rated Kiss of Deception 3.5 stars, which I don't know, like I enjoyed the first portion of the book, but then the last portion really annoyed me. And then of course I DNF'd Heart of Betrayal, so yeah. So that was Kiss of Deception and Heart of Betrayal. So I finished 2 books in January and I DNF'd one. And then in February, again, it was a really slow month for me. So I started 1 book, but while I was reading that physical book, I was also listening to the audiobook of Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. I'm wanting to read these books for ages, but I've never been able to find them anywhere. I swear I searched them up on Spotify like a while ago and they didn't have it on there, but I looked it up in February and it was on there. So I finally started listening to it. So we have our main character, Chloe Brown, and she has chronic illness. She's got a lot of chronic pain and she ends up getting into a near-death accident, which sort of like freaks her out and makes her realize that she's not having a lot of fun with her life, I guess. You know how they say like your life flashes before your eyes when you come close to death? She has that, and it's sort of her imagination of it is like a newspaper article of her death, and it's like listing significant things that she's done and it's like 0. And so she's like, I'm insignificant. I've done nothing in my life. So she makes a list of things that she can do to get a life, which involve a few adventurous things, I guess. But Chloe, being a very unadventurous person and not used to doing any of these things, she decides that she needs a teacher, someone who has done these things, because her trying to force herself to do it is just not working out. So she employs her, what's he called? Superintendent, that's what he is. Gets her superintendent to agree on a trade, sort of. She'll make a website for him and he will help her complete this list. Now, he looks like a real bad boy, you know. He's got a motorcycle, he's got tattoos, but he's also a painter. He's sweet at art. And they sort of dislike each other. After he starts helping her out with completing this list, they sort of get to know each other and, of course, romance ensues. I really like this overall. It was very sweet. The characters were all very unique and like felt real, which if you couldn't tell, I enjoy reading books like that. I thought it was funny. If you didn't know, Adjua from Bridgerton, Lady Danbury, voices the audiobook, which I listened to it, I started playing it and I was like, this sounds familiar. I know this voice. And I was like, is it? And I looked it up, it is. And she did such a good job. Like, sometimes I literally forgot that she was reading it when she was reading Red's parts, because like her voice fully transforms. I'm stunned, amazed, like wonderful. And honestly, the fact that she was reading it made me want to listen to it even more. It was just a really sweet rom-com. It was what I needed. I was really into this at the beginning, and then sort of close to the end, I think I had like 2 hours left of the audiobook. I sort of lost interest a bit. I stopped listening to it for a few days. Partly that I got a bit busy that week, but yeah. And then I came back and I powered through and I listened to the rest of the audiobook. And I did really enjoy it. However, there is a slight, very slight, third act miscommunication. Not a sort of a breakup. This is just a warning for anyone who doesn't like that trope. I personally do not. I feel like a lot of third act breakups, they feel very contrived just to create conflict, and I'm like, you just don't need that. This, I understand. It was a miscommunication, which is also a trope that I hate. But I understand why there was a miscommunication here. They have perfectly good reasons for this miscommunication. However, he just really let his anger get a hold of him, and I didn't appreciate the way he treated her. But, you know, it was resolved and it doesn't like overshadow the rest of the book. I still really enjoyed it, and I do want to continue the other books because, like I said, the characters were really fun and like quirky and weird. And I did actually really like the romance up until that point. Like, it was very sweet. I just felt like on one hand, we'd sort of already had the miscommunication / argument thing happen, so I didn't really get why we had to have it again. But that's me personally. Like, you might read it and not have a problem with it. That did sort of bring it down for me a little bit. So I ended up rating that 3.5 stars. I don't think I'm like obsessed with it. It was good. It did what I wanted it to do, but it did have a couple tropes that I just don't enjoy. So that's Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Okay, and the final book that I read for February was Jade City by Fonda Lee. I loved this book. Loved it. It was so good. This is an adult fantasy. It's set in a fantasy world, but it's mainly set in a city called Janloon on the island of Kekun, but on this island there's jade. And jade, for some people, it can enhance like strength and speed and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, if you don't have sort of an immunity, I guess, to the jade, if you wear jade, you can go crazy. It'll like kill you if you don't have the immunity to it, or like the ability to wield it, I guess. And then there's also people called Stone Eyes who have no reaction to jade whatsoever. So they can touch it and nothing happens to them. They don't get enhanced powers or physical ability, and they also don't get what they call the itches, which eventually leads to like insanity, and people tend to when they get the itches. So on the island of Kekun, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I don't know how people pronounce it. So jade only grows on the island of Kekun, and again it enhances people's abilities. So obviously everyone wants it. So there, years and years ago, there was an invasion from the Shotarians, I'm pretty sure, and they tried invading Kekun and taking over, and in order to basically get control of jade. However, there were jade warriors that were part of a clan. They ended up being able to win the war and push back the Shotarians, and so forth starts the book basically. So we follow 2 generations down from when the war with the Shotarians happened, and since then the clan has split apart into multiple clans on the island, but there are 2 major clans called the No Peak clan and the Mountain clan. We follow our main characters in the No Peak clan. So we follow the 3 siblings of basically the leaders of the No Peak clan. We have the oldest, Lan, the middle, Hylo, and the youngest, Shay. In the clan, you have the Pillar, which is basically the leader, and then you have the Horn, which is the leader of like the warriors, and then you have the Weatherman, who handles all the business sides of things and sort of like the diplomatic stuff. So Lan is the Pillar because he's the oldest, Hylo is the Horn, and Shay, a couple years ago, left her family and left the island because of some drama. So she is not the Weatherman, even though she was raised to be the Weatherman. So the current Weatherman is their grandfather's Weatherman. He's been the Weatherman the whole time. Their dad is dead. He's gone. So the position of Pillar went from their grandfather straight to Lan because their father died. So Lan and Hylo are both fairly young to be in their roles because they sort of skipped a generation. I think it's best going into this book like not really knowing much about it, because that's how I went into it. I just knew that it was sort of like clan wars. So if you want like absolutely no information on it, which I recommend, I'd say probably stop watching. But I did give this book 4 stars. I loved it. I did take a really long time to read it, but typically if that happens with a book, I end up not wanting to read it. But with this, every single time I picked it up again after not having read it for a couple of days, immediately sucked in. I was immediately excited to read what was happening, and I did love the characters, actually more than I expected I would. Like, I didn't realize how much I loved them until some things happened. So I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I'm really excited to keep reading the next books, but I don't have them at the moment. The city and the world and like the lore and magic and all that just feels so like rich and amazing, and I feel like it was all balanced really well. Like, I didn't feel lost when I was reading this book at all, but I also didn't feel like we were getting like massive chunks of world building, because it is quite a rich, like, you're in a new fantasy world, and you're in a world, specifically a city, with a lot of backstory and a lot of history, not only with other countries but also within itself. And then you have a lot of characters that are very nuanced, and there's a lot of complications and sort of rocky relationships between a lot of them. So there's a lot of backstory. Like, it's not really like the beginning of a story. Like, this has been going on for ages. This is just when we are introduced to it. And I think it was just done so well, and the characters feel so real. Like, at this point, like, I think it's pretty obvious that that's what I like most about books, is when characters are realistic and they've been written really well. And also, like, sibling relationships are a big part of this book, because our main characters are the 3 siblings, and they're just so interesting to me to read. I don't know, I really loved it. But yeah, they all have like really strong beliefs and clearly have like different ways that they would react to a certain situation, and they have their own contradicting beliefs and very like complicated relationships with one another. And yeah, I just really enjoyed that. None of them are perfectly likable. I just really love these characters. This is also a very political, intrigue heavy book, which I actually really like. I know a lot of people who read The Cruel Prince thinking it's like purely romance end up getting disappointed because it's a very small part of the book. That's the same with Jade City. Like, this is definitely not focused on romance like at all, but I love that about The Cruel Prince, and I loved it about Jade City. I think it's really interesting. But yeah, I just really love this book. Definitely my favorite read so far, and again, I can't wait to get into the rest of the series. But yeah, those were my reads for January and February. I'm hoping March I can read a little bit more. It was also The Prisoner's Throne release day 2 days ago when I'm filming this. I probably won't be able to get my hands on it until next week. I'm so excited. We get Jude and Carter back. I've completely forgotten majority of things that have happened in The Stolen Heir, and I haven't done a reread, and I don't have time now, but I'm so excited. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like and subscribe for more. Hopefully I'll see you for my next video. Bye!